Hi listeners, Jason here. We are excited to finally announce registrations for the biggest psych health and safety community event ever. The inaugural The Psych Health and Safety Conference will be held at the Sofitel Wentworth, Sydney, June 19 to 20, 2024 and offer concurrent virtual attendance. It'll feature live podcast recordings with OG researchers including Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter of Burnout fame, Psych Health and Safety USA podcast host I. David Daniels, Australian super experts including the likes of David Burrows, a special 10-year anniversary integrated approaches to workplace mental health panel with authors Tony Lamontagna, Angela Martin and Kat Page, hand-picked case studies from organisations doing it well, and a very special interview with plaintiff Zagi Kozarov by Catherine Dunlop on that High Court case which we previously covered on the podcast. This event will sell out. Get in quick to secure tickets at early bird prices for the 2-day conference, pre-conference masterclasses, and the VIP dinner. The first 200 in-person registrations also get a copy of her latest book, The Burnout Challenge, signed by Christina Maslach herself. Find out more and register at www.psychhealthandsafetyconference.com. Now, on to this episode.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hello and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast for the UK. I'm joined today by my wonderful and beautiful host, Kate Field.
Morning or good afternoon or good evening, everyone, depending on when you are listening to this. I'm having crazy hair day today. Look at that. Wild.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, Kate. It's, I mean, there are those who are listening to this in audio but really can't.
No, it won't make any difference.
No.
So that's good, probably best for them that they can't see today.
I mean, I make no reference to Morticia. I'm just,
well, that would almost be better. It's just because that would be all flat. Otherwise, it's just like a
it was
fluffy
in her curly days. She did have curly days, honestly.
She did. That's true. That's true.
In the very early versions of the Addams Family. Okay, well, obviously we start the podcast on a high. I don't know about you, and I'm sorry, listeners, but we're going to have to say this again. We've had a few days of sun again, have we not?
Well, yes, it's now raining, of course.
Oh, yeah, and it's rain. If you could understand this morning, when I first heard that rain, I've got all my garden furniture out the back, all soft furnishing, and I ran out in my running shorts and t-shirt and a pair of what they call flip-flops in England, but thongs in Australia. Grabbed it all and came in, and it's going to take me days for it to dry. So,
oh, no!
I have
the joys of British weather.
I have a special place for my garden furniture, so it stays dry, so I don't have to go through this process. But anyway, enough of our lives. Kate, I'd like you to introduce our guest, and then our guest can give us a discuss who, where, what, and how.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I'm delighted that Sara Flanagan has agreed to join us today. We have spent many conversations, many hours discussing psychological health and safety. So I'm thrilled that Sara's been able to join us. So would you like to kind of give a little bio on yourself rather than me do it?
Sure. Thank you, Kate. Thanks, Peter. Really great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And I'm pleased we're here to talk about psych health and safety because I've no expertise in hairstyling, which I was a bit nervous was going to be the original topic there. So I'm Sara Flanagan. I've been working in wellbeing for about 20 years, I suppose. I've got a background in HR and I've worked largely in the professional services industry. So I'm all about knowledge workers and the impact of the kind of work that we do on people's well-being and how we can really ensure that we're providing the best environment for them. So Yeah, so that's me, I guess.
Great, thank you. And one of the reasons I thought it would be really great for our listeners to listen to your experiences is the nature of the work you've done. You've dealt with very complex organisations in terms of their governance, different business units spread across different geographies, and kind of the challenges in terms of navigating that environment. So can we start there in terms of, you know, what that's looked like for you and how you've navigated it, and some of the kind of the ways you've found to compromise or the ways you found to influence?
Yeah, sure, Kate. It's a great question. And for those who aren't familiar with professional services organisations, they're typically partnerships. And even in a global environment, which I'm working in at the moment, though I've also worked UK as well, the decision making and governance is very complicated. They're matrixed organisations, and in different locations, the decisions tend to be made locally with an overlay of global governance. So the stakeholder map is really complicated, and there's a huge amount of consultation and collaboration required to move things forward. So it's not a really super easy environment where a decision is made at a senior level and it cascades and floats down. It's very much about relationships and influencing and bringing people along with you. And so some of the kind of strategies that I've employed over the years are really about working with the willing, pushing at open doors, and taking those opportunities where we can to produce really great outcomes that then kind of speak for themselves.
Great. And you know, how do you kind of navigate, because you and I have spoken about this a number of times. You know, you want to do the best, so looking at standards like 45003, you know, you look for sort of the benchmarking, and to use that as a guideline. You know, how do you have those conversations? You know, how do you influence and get that buy-in to take that particular approach or a different approach that you're advocating?
Yeah, I think the frameworks and the best practice are super helpful to guide us and to inform. And I think in the environments that I've worked in, people are very interested in what does great look like, what are others doing, how can we be the best. It's a very driven environment, and full of high standards and excellence, which is great. So having that guidance is really helpful and important. I think the challenge is applying that in a complicated workplace. So how do we take what's very nice and neat and tidy and clear in a guidance and apply that in the real world in a very complicated organisation full of very, very capable people who have multiple different priorities. So there's never anything easy, but that's what makes it interesting, isn't it?
It really does.
Obviously, you're working across multiple regions, and that. How do you find the cultural element of that in terms of standards and people sort of taking on board, like getting that continuity?
Yeah. Not easy, I would say. And what I've noticed in a global environment is I find there's a risk of kind of almost assuming that everyone's in the same place as the UK. And obviously that's just not the case. And so we've got markets in varying stages of maturity, both because of where the organisation is in that particular market, but also the wider cultural and social aspects. So the environment in which people are working in, not just within our organisation, but externally as well, can be very different. And so what works in the UK might not work in another market, might be very different from what the US wants. And I think the challenge in this kind of global complexity is having a level of consistency and principles that kind of wrap around what you're doing, whilst also allowing enough agility and flexibility for the markets to do what's right in their locations. So I think it is very difficult, but it is also really, really interesting. And I should just say also that before I worked in a global environment, I did work, as I mentioned, in the UK, and that came with its own challenges, even with just one market, right? So you've still got lots of people with differing views and differing preferences and complexity in the organisation. That means that having a kind of very packaged up solution doesn't always work, even though there are some approaches that need to be, at policy level consistent. So there's always this kind of balance of what's going to be really consistent, what are the things that really matter and we really want to say this is our guiding principles, versus where's the flexibility around maybe how we approach those things. Maybe we're going to get there in a slightly different way in different environments or at a different speed as well.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And I suppose thinking about that environment, have you found that you've had to focus on areas that are clearer or maybe more consistent from a global point of view, maybe from a legislation? So I was thinking about sort of professional services. So I was wondering whether sort of areas like bullying and harassment have been kind of an area that it's maybe been easier to tackle than, say, working hours because of the nature of expectation around consultants doing long hours.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think those aspects such as bullying and harassment, where there's significant risk associated with not getting it right, and it's more highly regulated, I think that there's more appetite at a global level to really set expectations and working with the various stakeholders in the organisation. So I've worked in large organisations, so I've been very privileged to have access to amazing resources from legal and risk teams and others, meaning that I can access expertise. So really kind of thinking about, as I said, what are the things that really matter? What are the things that are non-negotiable? We will not accept this kind of thing. And if this happens, this will be the consequence of it, versus things that might be more, okay, in principle, we want to get to here, but the way that we do it, as I said, might be slightly different.
Yeah, and I mean, I've it's fascinating you talk about that. I mean, we don't talk about psychosocial risk here in the UK. We talk about work-related stress. We do talk about depression and anxiety and health and well-being. And there's almost been an acceptance that we're just different here, and it's not helpful, because I think that, I mean, you might have a different perspective. I think globally the term psychological health and safety, psychosocial risk, has traction. Do you find it interesting why we do things differently in the UK?
I do find it interesting and sometimes a little bit frustrating. I don't know if that's the wrong thing to say, but I feel like, having been talking about this for quite a few years now, I feel that we've definitely made progress. We absolutely have, but it feels still quite slow. And I think that this is part of the reason that we talk about diagnostics and what's wrong with people, in inverted commas, rather than looking at the bigger picture of psychological health and safety and looking at it at an organisational level, where we can really think about people's well-being on the continuum that we all know and love, rather than, I think sometimes it's very tempting to look at things in pockets. So, we've got an issue with depression, so we're going to target that and give people something that's going to help them to feel a bit better, rather than looking at, okay, people's well-being as a holistic thing and all of the many, many factors that influence those things. So, yeah, interesting, a little frustrating. I'm maybe just a bit old and would like to see it go a bit quicker, but we're definitely making progress. When I think back to, and I'm sure you'll be the same, you think back even 10 years and we have made enormous progress.
Yes, and we've also regressed.
It's a bit of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right?
I remember sitting down with Dame Carol Black, and I went, Dame, I said, Carol, this is an amazing report. And it kind of triggered off the health and wellbeing movement in the UK. And we are full of optimism. And then I discovered that everyone wants a stress unicorn. And we're going back to these very individual interventions. I think it's beautiful, but it's functionally not very useful for managing my stress. If I squeeze it too much for too long, I get RSI. But so I would rather know what's your position about providing individual tools, maybe something like this, or the more sort of tertiary sort of provision, like some fruits and pears and having special days to act and apps. We've got hundreds of apps, have we not, to actually tackling systematic issues. There are now a 3 or 4-fold increase in apps during and since lockdown. And I've spoken before on this. Not many have evidence bases that they actually work. So,
Agreed.
Okay, I'm not trying to preempt what you're going to say, but
so yeah, you've well and truly popped me on my soapbox there, Peter. Thank you for introducing this topic. I'm super passionate about the importance of individuals taking care of themselves and having access to the information, resources, tools, time to do that. And it is really important. But it's not going to be enough. And I think I've seen working environments where we can throw everything at people to help them, but if the environment is still damaging or even just not great, just not conducive to good well-being, it doesn't matter how well people look after themselves. I feel like we're lacking this kind of holistic approach where the individual and the organisation are partnering to create great well-being. And it's more than just, oh, you're not feeling well, so here's something to help you feel better. But we should be health enabling. Our jobs and the purpose that they bring should be helping us be better, feel better, have better well-being, not doing a bit of damage and then saying, oh, here's something that can help you. The apps piece, I'm worn out by apps, if I'm being really honest. And that's not to say that I'm not an app user and I don't have anything on my phone. But like with everything in wellbeing, there's no one size fits all. So we're never going to be able to create an app that can be so bespoke that every individual gets exactly what they want. Even just the notion of accessing support through an app is a very personal individual choice and doesn't suit everyone. The other challenge I have with apps, agreed, not evidence-based. There seem to be a million of them. None of them seem to be actually doing very much other than potentially a nice bit of PR to say to employees, oh, we've given you this great app, aren't we caring? Which is, I guess, something, but it's not going to have a kind of long-term impact. But one of the greatest challenges I think about apps is these apps are competing on our mobile devices with organisations that create social media that spend millions and millions and millions of pounds on creating something that draws people in, that's addictive, that drags their attention. And so it's very hard to understand how a wellbeing app from your organisation is going to compete on the phone with that, because I think people are always going to get, once they've got their phone in their hands, and we know the addictive nature of these things, I think it's quite hard to get people's attention. So I guess there is a place for apps, but I think it's quite limited. And I would much rather see organisations investing in all the stuff that we know is great, like line manager training and teaching people how to work well together and considering the environment and the hours and the culture of the organisation. And do our processes support and enable people, or do they create barriers for people and frustrations? How do our policies affect people? All the stuff that we know, which is hard, right? It's easy to say, oh, here's some money, go and implement the app, we're all good. But doing it properly is really hard. And I think that may be why we perhaps haven't got there yet. Sorry, that was a really long answer. I did warn you about the soapbox.
Oh no, I love a soapbox. Trust me. I have a confession to make. I did become very addicted to TikTok during lockdown, and particularly cat videos, cats and dogs. Yeah, and I might still have the occasional flurry into them most days, it just relaxes me.
Well, but that's okay, Peter, because they're designed to give you that dopamine hit, right? That's their whole purpose. And they've spent, as I said, millions researching how best to do that and feeding you constant content that's going to meet your needs. And so that's a lot more attractive than, oh, I'm not feeling great. Maybe I ought to go and have a look at the EAP app and see if they've got some guidance on how I might do some breathing exercises. Doesn't sound quite so exciting, does it?
I know. I mean, yes, it is a dopamine hit, but when that donkey comes up and he's really happy to see his friend for the first time and he's crying, you're like, you're going to get emotional, don't you? I'm sorry, I'm going a bit into.
I was to say your browsing history is getting very interesting. We went from cats to donkeys. I think we should probably start.
No. This is the thing with TikTok. Any animal-related story that comes through, doesn't it? That's the thing. It does. But I love your soapbox, and I'd stand on your soapbox with you because I agree entirely in what you're saying. And it literally, they are. If you do a app search for well-being, you'd be astounded how many apps are out there, and how many times people phone you and go, "I've got this wonderful well-being app." And you're like, "No, just no."
And I think by wonderful, I think what they mean is it's beautifully designed. The user interface is great. People can find what they're looking for really easily. It's technologically safe. It's stable. All the kind of that side of it, rather than this, like, does it actually help you? And where's the evidence for that? That people who use this app feel more well. Where's that?
Yeah. I'm going to let Kate take over because I'm going to move away.
Oh no, I mean I'm all on the soapbox with both of you here on this. I mean, so many organisations have gone with apps because I think it's quick and easy and it looks shiny, and I think you mentioned it, Sara, about in HR terms it's called the employee value proposition. You're trying to attract talent, and I would imagine this can be a particular challenge in sort of professional services, trying to attract the best talent. How do you make everything look shiny and wonderful and go, oh yeah, look, here's this app, but while you're on your phone you can just be checking your emails
on this mobile device we've kindly given you.
Yeah. Is your experiences been that people are encouraged to have the work phone and a separate personal phone? Because this is when if we're getting on soapboxes, this is my soapbox. So I've always had two phones, because you're absolutely right. As soon as you have a phone in your hand, the temptation is to go into other things. So I have my work phone, and my personal phone. I think Peter's got 3 phones. So is that something you see as a kind of is that something you encourage? Is it something you see organisations think about, or is it just not considered now because we're all so glued to our phones all the time?
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think in professional services, because the nature of the work is such that a lot of people are not in the same place every day, and often are not even in the organisation's own offices. So in the organisation I work with at the moment, people tend to be out at clients Monday to Thursday and might come into our offices on a Friday for more kind of collaborative and team stuff. So people are on the move a lot. They're travelling as well, and they could be travelling quite long distances and be staying away from home. So it's important that they can access their technology in a really flexible way. And of course they have laptops, but whilst you're actually on the move, you're not going to get out your laptop in the middle of a short tube journey or something, or if you're in a cab going across London. but using the phone means that they can access their, check on their emails, check their diary, submit their expenses, all of those kind of admin-y things. So I think it's really useful because it's an enabler for people, but there are two sides to it, aren't there? It's a double-edged sword, because in the enabling, you're also creating more opportunity for work in an environment where the hours are already quite long and the work is very demanding. It's a high performance environment. Professional services, all of the organisations I've worked in have had that in common. And the people who are attracted to professional services as a career are highly driven type A personalities who, really want to succeed, really want to do well. And so they're more likely to engage with their work outside of their sort of core hours as well. People want to, because they love their work and they want to succeed and they want to do well and deliver excellence to the client. So the mobile device is an enabler of that, as well as the convenience of, I'm going to submit my expenses now quickly whilst I'm getting a cab to the station, rather than having to log into the laptop. So I do think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But yeah, it's an expectation, I think, as well. And particularly when you're recruiting younger people, where it just kind of is normal to do everything on your device. So, why wouldn't your employer give you a device? And I loved what you said, sorry, and I'm rambling a bit now, but I love what you said about 2 devices, because years ago, when I was young, I had one device and I thought this was very highly convenient. This was great. I only had to carry one phone. It was really annoying having to carry 2 phones and everything. I never switched off, ever. I was the person on holiday at the pool with my kids playing on my work emails. And I've got to tell you that I didn't have that important a job, that I wasn't in a kind of like mega leadership role where you never switch off. It really wasn't that important. But again, the addiction, it pulls you in. And so quite a few years ago, I switched to 2 devices. And I do find it helps just with a kind of mental separation of, that's the work stuff and that's the personal stuff. And my work phone doesn't come with me on holiday.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
I do exactly that. Sorry, that's my strategy.
Yeah, it was very clear to me very early on that was a huge risk. So one of my big wins in the last sort of 12 months is I've finally managed to convince one of my work colleagues to have 2 phones so that they can turn off their work phone.
I think people forget about how important recovery is, and we kind of discount our recovery time. We give it up for other activities. And I always try and think of rest and recovery as an activity in itself. So when people are resting, they feel like they're doing nothing. You're not doing nothing. You're resting and recovering. And that's important.
I love that. Yeah, it's an activity in itself. Absolutely. I think that's so true. And somehow I think with technology, because it's kind of this always on, you sometimes you feel guilty if you're not doing something, and it's crazy.
It is, and carries on being crazy. Sarah, I want to ask you to give, if you could give 2 tips from your wealth of experience. What would they be when it comes to the promotion of psychological health and safety and mental health? You're an advocate on mental health, but you also work with the C-suite, and you work with a range a range of stakeholders. So if you could give 2 tips on how you get the message across and the way you work, what would they be?
I think the first thing is something we haven't really touched on, but I'm hoping is a kind of a familiar tale to you. And that is the use or not of people with lived experience for storytelling, awareness raising. And I think if I had my time again, I would absolutely still want to heavily engage with people with lived experience to help us with the narrative and to help us create understanding of the impact of poor mental health and what might help. And I do think it's super powerful. What I think is a risk is that we can lean too heavily on our colleagues with lived experience. And that has two impacts. One on the individual, which is that we're kind of leaning on our more vulnerable people to carry some of the load that is the organisation's responsibility. And often those people are very willing and want to do that, which is great. But I think we do need to put in some safety and protection for those people to ensure that they're not doing any harm or putting themselves at risk. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that people with lived experience have an incredible insight into their personal perspective. Of course, they are experts in themselves, but often they're not experts in the broader range of well-being and issues and don't have strategic insight into holistic well-being. And so I have seen in organisations where the approach has become very narrowed by the influence of maybe a few individuals speaking up about their personal experience. So I think the lived experience piece needs to be part of a much broader strategy, an important part, but not the only part. So that would be the first thing I would say if I had my time again. And then the second piece, and we've talked about this a lot today, is to be very wary of focusing too much on the individual. So yes, absolutely, we need to look after our people and do all the stuff that's right for them, as we've talked about. But again, it needs to be part of a much broader strategy. And I think those really challenging things around leadership and team dynamics and, it's not exciting to say to people, well, we've had a look at our performance management policy to make sure that, it's enabling of people with mental health problems and it's not affecting people's well-being. No one's excited by that. People, but like you said, Kate, you give them a nice shiny app and everyone's like, oh, goody, I've got a nice meditation app or something. So I think tackling those more difficult things at the same time as working with individuals is another thing I would reflect on. I think we'd get there quicker if we did that.
Yeah, I mean that's really great, and we haven't, we don't have many people reflect on the use of lived experiences, and I think it is a balance, isn't it? Because I think it's very powerful. I think it helps in terms of demystifying and breaking down some of the stigma. But for me, it risks reinforcing that last point you made, which is focusing on the individual and not the systemic issues. Because a lot of those stories, that if you go below the layers, the root cause, the systemic stuff is there, but that's not what's discussed as part of it. So, how finding that balance, I think, is really, really critical.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking of sort of tips that our listeners might like, and you've changed role in the last few months. When you kind of go into a new organisation, where do you start in terms of sort of navigating, I suppose, understanding the organisation and where they are on that journey? What's your process? What does that look like?
Yeah, Kate, it's a really good question because it's quite hard. And I think when you've come from a place where you're very familiar with what you were doing, it's easy, or it can be a bit tempting to come in and say, well, I've got all the answers because this is how we did it where I worked before, and let's do this, and here we go. And although obviously your previous experience and knowledge is going to be very helpful and is indeed the reason why you've been recruited, actually organisations are so complicated and so different, even ones that are in similar industries. And so I think what I did was I spent a lot of time talking and listening to people and kind of really trying to work out who are the people that I'm going to need to collaborate with and how am I going to do that. So there's a whole piece around how do we do things around here? What is the usual etiquette with regard to meetings? How do people tend to engage? What are the comms channels? All the usual stuff that you have to learn as part of your induction process into any organisation. So that's kind of one piece. And then on top of that, it's, well, where are we on wellbeing and who knows where we are? And I definitely had to put that together, piece it together from people who are very, familiar and those who've been in the team for a while, but also the stakeholders in the business. So what is the impression versus the reality as well? Because you've got that kind of sometimes a gap in perception in terms of what people think is happening versus what we're actually doing. I think those conversations with senior stakeholders did provide me with an opportunity to at least try to close a little bit of that gap. So when you're new, you have that huge advantage of being able to say, well, I'm brand new, so I don't really know, but this is my observation. And you get forgiven for it, which is fantastic. I've kind of run out of that at the moment. I think I'm not going to get away with it any longer. But being confident to speak up and ask the questions has been really, really helpful to me. And I think I'm kind of long enough in the teeth that I'm happy to get out there and do it. So having that confidence in yourself as the SME, which can be a really lonely place, right, as the SME, where everyone's looking to you for expertise, and that kind of, that little voice inside your head tells you, well, do you really know what you're talking about? So kind of just being confident that actually, yeah, you do know your stuff. So go out there and find out what's happening and ask the questions before you start creating the solutions.
I like that. Yeah, I think that's the perfect way of summarising it. Ask the questions before you go for the solutions. I think is great. Really good. Pete?
Sara, we could spend ages and ages and ages talking, but unfortunately, we need to let you get on and do your day job. We asked you a question before about 2 tips, and I know that you've as you said been involved in professional services over the last 20 years, and I'd just like to know if there was one thing that you could go back and change on mental health and wellbeing, what would it be?
I think tackling the leaders, not just in the strategic way of, we need a strategy and getting their support for the strategic initiatives, but really getting leaders to understand their role and the impact of how they take decisions and how they behave and how they run the business. I think I would have accelerated that if I could have done. And I think I probably didn't fully understand that, or perhaps also didn't have the opportunity to do that 20 years ago, when it was very much around how can we help the individual, what are the services we're going to provide, who are the suppliers that we're going to work with. And as I said, that stuff's super important. But I think we would have got there more quickly if we'd have started with the leaders and their understanding of things.
Yeah, 100%. Same for you, I guess, Kate, isn't it? In your role, is getting leaders to really engage on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I was thinking of, it's the shadow of the leader, and I don't think they understand, so and I think there's such an assumption that the leader has to be seen to be working hard to come up with to answer the emails at the middle of the night, to be answering emails on holiday. And actually it's the little things about not answering the emails in the middle of the night, not answering emails where on holiday, are actually really powerful in terms of setting the culture for the organisation. So I'd agree from that point of view. It's not just changing the mentality, it's actually the actions that they take and the impact, and understanding the impact they have.
Yeah.
Wow, we've
Agreed.
got a whole new podcast. in one response to one question, is like, oh my gosh, let's explore that one. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to come on to our podcast, and it's been wonderful just to dip into your brain and your experience and find out, because these are an important way of just telling people, there are different ways that we can influence people on the psych health and safety journey. So for our listeners, I hope you enjoy, and you're enjoying it on the various platforms that we broadcast on. And I know if you're on YouTube, hope you enjoy the video as well of us. And we look forward to speaking to you and speaking to another guest very shortly.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.